is kind of awesome, I think. And he came on board, and I say this selfishly, but he came on board initially after becoming a friend, after being introduced by Jim. Where's Jim? Thank you for introducing us at your party. This is why I love parties so much. He came on board as an advisor and was very active in Ahura. And after about a year and a half, he's like, hey Brian, I want to come on board and be your CTO. And I was like, I didn't think that was an option. I didn't think it was on the table, which is why I never brought it up to him. And he's like, yeah, I can do a pretty good job there. I'm like, yeah, you can. So I told Richard this the next time I saw him. I'm like, yeah, I think Dekai's gonna come on board as my CTO. And he's like, how the hell did you get Dekai to be your CTO? Everyone's been trying to do that for decades. So he's absolutely brilliant, and we're really excited to have him as our CTO. He's brilliant. He's won so many awards around the world. He's spoken so many stages. When he speaks about AI and ethics, people listen, and we're super thrilled to have him in such an intimate environment. So Dekai, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of our journey and believing in us. Thank you for building everything you're building and changing the world. Let's hear it for Dekai.
Happy birthday, Brian. I'm so sorry that I got here so late. Yesterday's program, I'm dying of FOMO. I was at the airport, literally in San Francisco, yesterday morning, only to discover that all the flight options that I had mapped out had evaporated, thanks to probably DEF CON. And so I got here at 6-something a.m. Been wonderful so far. Look forward to speaking with you, especially after being cooped up for the last 3 weeks doing this cross-country road trip all the way from the Midwest through Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, places like this. And you know what? Okay, I'm gonna tell you what happened at this rodeo, right? The MC is like, all right, who here is from Texas? Yes, Texas, yes. Okay, guys, be a bit more enthusiastic. That's all right. Who here is from North Carolina? No. All right. Who here is from California? Woo! Welcome to America. This is what we got the whole time. And the contradictions were constantly hitting us. We went to Mount Rushmore. These guys, right next to Crazy Horse. We went to Standing Rock. We went to the George Floyd site and memorial. We saw a lot of this. My daughter was like, I really want to get to California. But then we saw this in Wyoming. Our country has a severe crisis facing us, and a bunch of people have talked about this. Us versus them mentality is existentially dangerous, and I mean that domestically in our own country. And several quotes also that I've heard resonated with me today. You know who you are. That talk to themes that we're struggling with. Low information. 40%. Who was it who said? Was it Jaroslav? Who said?
I think it was Jaroslav. Yeah.
40% of Americans believe dinosaurs and people lived together at the same time. Welcome to democracy. Societal polarization and bias. Who said less fear, more love? Yes, thank you. Tech versus unintended consequences. Tech utopianism. But also governance, making proper use of innovation and technology to look at unintended consequences. And you know what? This is true not only domestically, it's true internationally. I can't go into the geopolitics. We've heard a lot of things today. I would love to talk about any of those topics with you outside of this little talk, because I want to focus a little bit on the information problem. And this is the central thing that I focus on in my work on AI ethics. How ideas get framed determine whether they're properly absorbed. And that depends on your underlying mental states. How ideas are framed determines whether the ideas resonate or not. Mindsets and personality traits determine a lot of this. And how ideas are framed cause them to get misinterpreted or not. It depends on underlying cognitive biases in context, underlying mental states. And so I'm just gonna, this is a very short talk, we're all hungry. I'm just gonna do an abbreviated quick tour of a couple of concepts that I've been developing both in the hardcore AI research, natural language understanding, deep language understanding, as well as on the AI ethics standpoint. Okay, just a few key points. One, you've all heard about bias. One thing I would like you guys to really differentiate, next time you hear people talking about bias, there are 3 different concepts floating around, and it's really important to distinguish them. One is human bias, and this is like what evolution left us with. Unconscious cognitive biases, hundreds of them. Mathematical, inductive biases, and AI, algorithmic biases. Now, the unconscious cognitive biases been documented for decades by people like Tversky and Kahneman and so forth. Thinking Fast and Slow, if any of you have read that. And this is one of the things that is hardest as an unintended consequence for us to fight today, because all the social media AIs, recommendation AIs, search engine AIs are today, thanks to market forces, pandering to what you want. We're the kids in the candy store with unlimited credit card. And they're happy to give it to us. People asked me what my mission was last month. It's fighting fundamental attribution error and confirmation biases. This is really, really important. Second, inductive biases. Not all bias is bad. In AI, in the science of learning, and in just mathematics of induction, there is no learning possible. It's not possible to learn a generalization without an inductive bias. If you don't have an inductive bias, all you can do is memorize. You cannot make that little leap of faith that says, I've seen enough examples, I now infer a general rule. And third, and part of that inductive bias is the representation language that you use to think of ideas. And this is related to what we call linguistic relativity, or the superiority hypothesis. Abstract thought is impossible without the ability to create, to learn, to use, and to extend languages. This is what gives human intelligence its character above that of your pet dog or your pet cat. Okay, second point I want to make is about information disorder. We have heard with, our friend Tristan's documentary on Netflix, with The Social Dilemma, about information disorder, especially in existential threats. Climate change, pandemics, geopolitics, domestic politics, and so forth. And people talk about misinformation, they talk about disinformation, and they talk about malinformation, as if this was it, because rule of threes. There are 3 things, and that's it. Wrong. The most important one nobody talks about. Think about it this way. What's the difference between disinformation and misinformation? Both of these are misleading falsehoods. The difference is disinformation is intentional. A bad actor is trying to mislead you for their own goals. Misinformation is unintentional, being spread. Now, if you have, on the one hand, lying versus willful negligence, that explains the difference between disinformation, which is lying, and misinformation, which is just negligence, often reckless negligence. However, malinformation is widely defined as partial truths. So fact-checking says, oh yeah, no, this is true, as far as it goes. But we omitted some crucial context. So if you heard that somebody, A was beating B up on the street, maybe A is the police and B is a protester or whatever, right? Or vice versa. Everybody goes, oh, that's horrible, police brutality, or whatever. If you omitted the crucial context that in the 10 seconds preceding, whoever B was on the verge of killing A. Well, it's not false that A was beating up B, but you kind of totally misled people, right? And so fact-checking is not enough against this kind of stuff. Crucial context is missing. What people are forgetting when they talk about malinformation is like, oh, the Russians are using malinformation or whatever it is. No, we're doing this to ourselves. The biggest problem is what I call neg information. No, we have to wake up and recognize any algorithm that we're using here is making a decision on which billion items you're not seeing. It's an algorithmic sensor, no judgment, just mathematical fact. And so the real question that we have to stop looking away from isn't, should we regulate censorship? You can't get away, everything is censorship, even today. The real question is, what are the censorship criteria that those algorithms are using to make those decisions? That has to be made transparent. We have to know how those things are working so that we can build, for example, predictive models that model out, simulate out what is going to be the unintended consequence of that kind of algorithm. We need algorithmic transparency. Fourth little point, and I promise you, there are only 5. Mindset resonance. I guess you guys have heard about Cambridge Analytica. Wait, Brittany.
She just left.
Okay, anyway, so this is the other whistleblower, right? The 901. So anyway, Cambridge Analytica. How many of you guys know that this was funded by the hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer? Right, okay. What people often don't realize is that Mercer, before he went to Renaissance Technologies on Wall Street, was at IBM Watson, working on getting machines to learn translation. His team at IBM Watson and my team, freshly at Hong Kong, were the only 2 that were working on machines that entirely learned how to translate by themselves. And when our field in AI introduced its honors, he and I were unfortunately the 2 that share the honors for the breakthroughs that led to things like Google Translate. People at this level here have known what he was doing with the same kind of DARPA level statistical modeling, predictive modeling, and so forth in the world of politics, misinformation, and so forth. That is not the kind of technology that much of our society in the governance and political sphere is able to, is even thinking about tackling right now. This is a huge problem because AI is exponentially scaling. And that's what's been happening to our society. AI is exponentially today increasing catastrophic polarization. These other issues of malinformation and even negative information, politicians and power brokers and corporations have been using these for ages. The difference is the ability to instantaneously amplify this through all the recommendation and search AIs that are out there. And it is quite possible that the only tools that we have that are capable of meeting that level of scale of the problems being created by these kinds of AIs would also have to require the scale of AIs. Now, that doesn't mean building another Cambridge Analytica on whichever political side you're on. That's only going to make things even more catastrophically polarized. The opposite of polarization is not more polarization. The opposite of polarization is down. We need AIs that exponentially increase empathy. And that means we need to build AIs that go way beyond GPT-3 or the Google Lambda. It's fun doing lots of newspaper interviews on that. We need AIs that deeply understand how people feel about their needs, about their concerns, their pain points, their aspirations. We need empathetic AI that's going to help organizations and societies to combat polarization, disinformation, discrimination, violence, poverty, and raise our ecosystem sustainability and good governance, health, education, and empathetic understanding. And so we're working on this under several different approaches, ranging from deep tech to public awareness to policy think tanks and so on. Working with some really famous collaborators on these projects. I'm just going to give you one simple example, because again, we're having. So this sentence here, believe it or not, this sentence, we took it off of Reddit. It was written by a woman on Reddit. And we fed it to the AIs that I'm describing, our AIs. And our AIs came out with this analysis, which is much easier to look at if I try to graph it out. And so what happens with father, this is from George Gonzalez's theory, but there are lots of theories like this. Strict father is where I grew up in the Midwest, tough love, figure it out. Nurturing parent is my Berkeley home. Very different mindsets. And you can see that different little pieces here reflect different underlying mindsets. And from that, you can figure it out. Now, if you just change 2 little words, so the example here is, you should pull yourself out of poverty. What would you say? That framing, is it strict father or nurturing parent? Strict father. Pull yourself out of poverty, right? If I just switch 2 words in here, we should pull you out of poverty. Flips to nurturing parent, right? So the crude word-based models that everybody's hyping right now in AI don't cut this kind of thing. You really have to understand what is the structure of the concepts, who are the participants, and this is the sort of framing things that we're working on now. Or we should pull ourselves out of poverty. So we've been applying this with projects with the United Nations and so forth to both inequality and climate change and sustainability. And there are tons of different ways that metaphors are being used to frame these issues. And in service of the Sustainable Development Goals, what we're working on is figuring out how we can use AI to scale an analysis of what kind of language framing, what sorts of choices of metaphors resonate with what kinds of mindsets and underlying values. And so next time I'm driving through Wyoming, I know how to speak. And so, my computer's like way behind. We need AI to recognize what Martin Luther King said. Instead of what today's recommendation AIs are doing, we have to remember darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. The last thing that I want to point out is AI for education, which of course is something that Brian and Alex and Maria and I are really thinking a lot about these days. As a longtime teacher, and maybe some of you are also professors or speakers, you get up, you're trying to educate people. What do you need to do? When you stand up in front of a crowd, you're not just like playing back a YouTube video of yourself. I don't need to be here. I could forget the 5 a.m. flights. I could have just sent a video. Right? No, this is about relationships. You are actually sensing, there's eye contact, we're understanding how people are reacting, body language, all sorts of stuff. What is your mental state? What did I say that didn't connect? What did I say that actually is connecting? And then once I have that sense, then I have to translate that into reframing my material so that I can properly nudge the learner and shift maybe my own pedagogical approach, shift my language, shift myself as a speaker. Everybody who's ever had to teach or give public talks knows this. That's what we need AIs to do. Once again. Because if we don't have the AIs do this, we're doing online education, and the systems aren't doing this, it's not going to be effective because of this. We need to have our online education systems, which are a way of massively scaling education to tackle this low information problem that I opened with. To understand the cognitive biases, complete the missing contexts, sense the underlying mental states. And that's what we're doing with Ahura.
Guys, how amazing was that? Let's hear it.